The space around Earth looked peaceful today. Captain Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of the Meridian, watching his home planet slowly turn below them. Blue oceans and white clouds made it look like a jewel floating in the darkness. But Jake knew this might be the last time he would see Earth looking so calm. "Captain, we're getting the final briefing ready," said Dr. Lisa Parker as she walked up to him. She carried a thick folder filled with papers and pictures. Her face looked worried, and Jake could see why. Today they were going to meet the Zephyrians for the first time. Jake had read all the reports. The Zephyrians were tall, scary aliens who looked like giant lizards. They had conquered dozens of planets across the galaxy. Every species that met them either gave up right away or got destroyed within days. No one had ever said no to them and lived to tell about it. "Tell me again about their fear tricks," Jake said as they walked to the meeting room. Lisa opened her folder and pulled out some pictures. "They can make chemicals that cause fear in most species. When you smell these chemicals, your body thinks you're in terrible danger. Most aliens can't even think straight when they're around Zephyrians." She showed him a picture of a Zephyrian warrior. It stood 8 feet tall with black scales that looked like armor. Its eyes were bright yellow and its mouth was full of sharp teeth. Even in the picture, it looked frightening. "They also use their size to scare people," Lisa continued, "and they're very smart about fear. They study each species and learn exactly what scares them most. Then they use that knowledge to make them give up without a fight." The other crew members gathered around the table. Commander Ben Walsh, the ship's second in command, looked nervous. So did Lieutenant Amy Foster, their communications officer. Engineer Pete Collins kept checking his equipment like he was afraid it might break. "Sir," said Amy, her voice shaking a little, "are you sure we should do this? Maybe we should wait and send a bigger ship." Jake looked around the room at his crew. These were good people, brave people, but he could see the fear in their eyes already, and they hadn't even met the Zephyrians yet. "We're humanity's first chance to make friends instead of enemies," Jake said calmly. "Earth sent us because they believe we can do this job. I believe we can do it too." The ship's computer made a soft beeping sound. "Captain," said Amy, checking her screens, "we're getting a message from the Zephyrian ship. They want to meet us at the agreed location." Jake nodded. "Take us there, Ben." The Meridian turned and began moving toward empty space between Earth and Mars. As they traveled, Jake thought about the mission. Earth's leaders had argued for months about whether to try talking to the Zephyrians. Some wanted to hide from them, others wanted to attack first. But Jake had convinced them that talking was worth trying. "Contact on sensors," reported Pete from his station. "It's big, Captain, really big." Through the main window, they could see a dark shape growing larger. The Zephyrian ship looked like a giant knife floating in space. It was black metal covered with sharp points and glowing red lights. The Meridian could fit inside it 50 times over. "They're sending us a message," said Amy. Her hands were shaking as she worked at her controls. "Put it on screen," Jake ordered. The main screen filled with the image of a Zephyrian. It was even more frightening than the pictures. Its black scales seemed to absorb light, making it look like a shadow with glowing yellow eyes. When it spoke, its voice sounded like rocks grinding together. "Human vessel," it said. "I am Ambassador Kethvar of the Zephyrian Empire. Prepare to be boarded. Any resistance will result in your destruction." The screen went dark. Jake could hear his crew breathing hard behind him. The smell of fear sweat filled the air. "Captain," whispered Ben, "maybe we should call for help." "There's no help coming," Jake said quietly. "It's just us." 20 minutes later, they felt the Zephyrian shuttle attached to their ship. The airlock hissed as it opened. Heavy footsteps echoed through the corridors, getting closer and closer to the bridge. When Ambassador Kethvar walked onto the bridge, the effect was immediate. Amy fell to her knees, gasping for air. Pete backed against the wall, his eyes wide with terror. Ben tried to stand straight, but his whole body was shaking. The ambassador was even bigger than expected. His head nearly touched the ceiling. His yellow eyes moved slowly across the room, studying each human like they were insects. Behind him came 4 Zephyrian guards, each one carrying weapons that hummed with deadly energy. The smell hit them next. It was like rotting meat mixed with chemicals that made their hearts race and their minds scream danger. Most of the crew could barely stand up, but Jake Morrison just stood there, calm as ever. He looked up at the towering alien and did something that shocked everyone in the room. He smiled and held out his hand. "Welcome aboard the Meridian, Ambassador Kethvar," Jake said in a friendly voice. "I'm Captain Morrison. Would you like some coffee?" The ambassador stared down at the small human, who showed no fear. For the first time in his long life, Kethvar felt confused. This was not how first contact was supposed to go. Ambassador Kethvar stood frozen for several seconds. In all his years of conquest, no creature had ever offered him refreshments during first contact. Species usually screamed, begged, or fainted when they met him. But this small human just waited patiently for an answer about coffee. The other humans on the bridge were still shaking with fear. Their captain's strange behavior seemed to confuse them as much as it confused Kethvar. The ambassador's guards looked at each other uncertainly. This was not going according to their usual plan. "I do not drink your liquids," Kethvar finally said, his voice deep and threatening. He leaned down closer to Jake, bringing his massive head only inches away. His breath smelled like sulfur and decay. "Human captain, you will come with me. We will speak alone." Jake nodded like this was a perfectly normal request. "Of course, Ambassador. Lisa, please make sure our guests are comfortable while we talk." Dr. Parker looked terrified but managed to nod. "Yes, sir." Kethvar led Jake through the ship's corridors to the main meeting room. The ambassador's guards followed behind, their weapons ready. Jake walked between them like he was taking a casual stroll around his neighborhood. The meeting room was small compared to Zephyrian standards. Kethvar had to duck his head to avoid hitting the ceiling. He positioned himself at the far end of the table and gestured for Jake to sit across from him. The distance between them was only about 6 feet. "Sit," Kethvar commanded. Jake pulled out a chair and sat down comfortably. He even crossed one leg over the other, like he was relaxing, in his living room. "Nice ship you have, Ambassador. How long did it take you to get here from your territory?" Kethvar ignored the question. He began releasing stronger fear chemicals from special glands in his neck. The smell filled the small room quickly. Most creatures would be paralyzed with terror by now. But Jake just sat there looking interested and patient. "Do you know who I am, human?" Kethvar asked, his voice growing louder. "You're Ambassador Kethvar of the Zephyrian Empire," Jake replied. "You represent one of the most powerful civilizations in this part of the galaxy. Your people have built an impressive empire. We have conquered 47 worlds," Kethvar said, standing up to his full height. His shadow fell across Jake like a dark cloud. "Entire species kneel before us. We have destroyed armies with just our presence. Cities surrender when they hear our ships are coming." Jake nodded thoughtfully. "That's quite an achievement. It must take a lot of skill to coordinate that many planets." The ambassador slammed his fist on the table. The metal bent under the impact. "You do not understand. We are your superiors. We are death itself." "I understand you're very successful," Jake said calmly. "Would you mind if I got some water? All this talking is making me thirsty." Kethvar stared at him in disbelief. This human was either completely insane or something else entirely. He decided to try a different approach. "Look at this," the ambassador said, pulling out a small device. The air above the table shimmered, and then a three-dimensional image appeared. It showed a planet covered with beautiful cities and green forests. "This was Calyx Prime," Kethvar explained, "home to 12 billion Calyxians. They thought they were safe behind their energy shields and defense fleets." The image changed. Now it showed the same planet covered in flames. Dead ships floated in space around it. The green forests were black ash. The cities were empty ruins. "We broke them in 6 hours," Kethvar said with pride. "Their leaders begged us to stop. They offered us everything they had. But it was too late. We do not accept surrender once the killing begins." Jake looked at the images with interest. "What happened to the survivors?" "There are no survivors. We do not leave witnesses to our mercy. I see, Jake said, still speaking in that same calm voice. And how many worlds have you done this to? 17, Kethvar replied. The others surrendered before we had to destroy them. They were smarter. The ambassador changed the image again. This time it showed different aliens kneeling. Before Zephyrian warriors, some were crying, others looked broken and hopeless. This is what victory looks like, Kethvar said. This is what every species learns when they meet us. Fear is the beginning of wisdom. Jake studied the images for a moment. Then he looked back at Kethvar with those same calm eyes. Is there anything else you'd like to show me? Kethvar could not believe what he was hearing. He had just shown this human the destruction of entire civilizations. He had demonstrated the absolute power of the Zephyrian Empire. Any normal creature would be begging for mercy by now. Do you not understand what I have shown you? Kethvar demanded. This is what happens to species who oppose us. This is what will happen to your Earth if you do not submit. Jake reached into his pocket and pulled out a small metal container. He opened it and took out a mint, which he popped into his mouth. I understand perfectly, Ambassador. You're trying to scare me. I am not trying to scare you, Kethvar roared. I am showing you reality. I am showing you the fate of all who dare to resist us. Yes, Jake said with a slight smile. You're trying to scare me. The question is why it's not working. Kethvar felt something he had never experienced before. Uncertainty. Confusion. This tiny human was responding to his greatest displays of power like they were mildly interesting television shows. Why? Kethvar asked, and for the first time his voice was quiet. Why do you not fear us, human? Jake leaned back in his chair and looked directly into those terrible yellow eyes. What he said next would shake the ambassador to his very core. Jake Morrison looked at the towering alien across from him. Kethvar's yellow eyes burned with confusion and anger. The ambassador had just asked the most important question of his life, and Jake knew his answer would change everything. Because, we've seen worse, Jake said simply. Kethvar tilted his massive head. Worse? What could be worse than the destruction I have shown you? Jake reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small tablet. He placed it on the table and turned it on. The screen glowed softly in the dim room. Let me show you something. Ambassador, Jake said. He touched the screen, and an image appeared. It showed people lying in the streets of an old city. Their bodies were covered with black spots, and their faces were twisted with pain. This was Europe in the year 1347, Jake explained. A disease called the Black Death spread across our continent. It killed 1 out of every 3 people. Entire families died. Whole towns became empty. Children watched their parents die, and parents buried their children. Kethvar stared at the image. Your enemies did this to you? No, Jake said quietly. This just happened. Nature did it. The disease spread from person to person until millions were dead, but we didn't give up. We learned how to fight diseases. We became stronger. Jake touched the screen again. A new image appeared showing soldiers in muddy trenches. They looked young and scared. Explosions burst around them, and bodies lay scattered in the mud. This was World War I, Jake continued. From 1914 to 1918, we fought the bloodiest war in our history up to that point. Millions of young men died in trenches filled with mud, rats, and poison gas. They knew they would probably die, but they still climbed out of those trenches when ordered to attack. Why? Kethvar asked. Why would they do something so foolish? Because they believed it was right, Jake answered. They thought they were protecting their families and their way of life. Even when they were terrified, they did what they thought was necessary. The next image showed a giant mushroom cloud rising into the sky. Below it, a city was completely destroyed. Nothing was left but rubble and fire. This is Hiroshima, Japan in 1945, Jake said. We dropped a nuclear bomb on our own species. In one moment, we killed over 100,000 people. 3 days later, we did it again to another city? Kethvar's eyes widened. You destroyed your own kind? Yes, Jake said. We were at war with each other. We built weapons so powerful they could destroy entire cities. We used them because we thought we had to. But after we saw what those weapons could do, most of us decided never to use them again. Jake showed more images. Piles of dead bodies behind barbed wire. Trains carrying people to their deaths. Guards with guns watching over prisoners who were nothing but skin and bones. This was the Holocaust, Jake explained. From 1941 to 1945, we systematically murdered 6 million people just because of their religion. We built factories designed to kill people as efficiently as possible. We did this to ourselves. The ambassador leaned forward, studying the images more closely. Your own species did this? Some of us did it to others of us, Jake confirmed. But we also had people who fought against it. People who risked their lives to save strangers. People who hid families in their homes, knowing they would be killed if they were caught. More images flashed across the screen. A plane crashing into a tall building. People jumping from windows to escape the fire. Rescue workers running toward danger while everyone else ran away. This happened in 2001, Jake said. Terrorists flew airplanes into our buildings and killed 3,000 innocent people. But look at this. The image changed to show firefighters climbing stairs in a burning building. Their faces were covered with soot and sweat, but they kept going up while everyone else went down. These men knew the building might fall down, Jake explained. They knew they might die, but they climbed those stairs anyway because people needed help. 343 firefighters died that day trying to save others. Kethavar sat back in his chair. His massive form seemed smaller somehow. I do not understand. Why do you show me your failures? Why do you show me your weaknesses? Jake smiled sadly. Because they're not weaknesses, Ambassador. They're why we're not afraid of you. I do not comprehend, Kethavar said. Jake leaned forward. You conquer other species. You make them afraid, and they surrender. But we've been conquering ourselves for thousands of years. We've faced every horror you can imagine, and most of them came from us. The captain touched the screen one more time. New images appeared showing people helping each other. Doctors treating patients during plagues. Soldiers sharing food with enemies. People of different colors working together after fighting each other for years. Every time we do something terrible to ourselves, we also do something beautiful, Jake said. Every time we create a new way to destroy, we create a new way to heal. Every time we fall down, we get back up and try to be better. Jake looked directly into Kethavar's yellow eyes. You want to know why we don't fear you? Because we've been afraid of ourselves for our entire history. We've seen what real monsters look like, and they look just like us. After facing that, an alien with big teeth and scary chemicals doesn't seem so frightening. The room was completely quiet. Kethavar stared at the small human who had just shown him something impossible, a species that had survived by destroying itself over and over, yet somehow became stronger each time. You are saying, Kethavar said slowly, that your greatest enemy is yourselves. Our greatest enemy has always been ourselves, Jake confirmed. And we're still here. Kethavar sat in silence for several minutes. His massive hands rested on the table and Jake could see them shaking slightly. The ambassador's yellow eyes stared at the tablet screen, which still showed images of humans helping each other after terrible disasters. There is more, Jake said gently. Would you like to see what we do when things get really bad? Before Kethavar could answer, Jake touched the screen again. A new image appeared showing a hospital ward full of sick people. Doctors and nurses in white coats moved between the beds, taking care of patients whose faces were covered with red spots. This was during a smallpox outbreak in 1972, Jake explained. The disease was highly contagious and often deadly. These doctors and nurses knew they could get sick and die just by being in the same room as these patients. But they stayed anyway, Kethavar observed. They stayed anyway, Jake confirmed. And look at this. The image changed to show the same doctors giving shots to children in a village. The children looked scared, but their parents smiled with relief. 20 years later, we had completely eliminated smallpox from our planet. A disease that had killed millions of people for thousands of years was gone forever because these people were willing to risk their lives to help others. Jake showed another image. It was a burning building with thick black smoke pouring from the windows. In front of the building, a firefighter was carrying a small child to safety. This firefighter ran into that burning building 3 times, Jake said. He saved this child, the child's sister, and their grandmother. On the 4th trip, the building collapsed. He knew it might happen, but he went back anyway because he heard someone calling for help. Did he survive? Kethvar asked quietly. He died, Jake said simply. But the family he saved is still alive today. They have children and grandchildren. Now, one of those grandchildren became a doctor who has saved hundreds of lives. Kethvar looked confused. But why would he sacrifice himself for strangers? Jake smiled. That's what I'm trying to show you, Ambassador. It's not just about sacrifice, it's about hope. Even when things look impossible, we keep believing they can get better. The next image showed people of different skin colors standing, together holding hands. Behind them was a man speaking to a huge crowd. This was 1963, Jake explained. For hundreds of years, people with dark skin were treated as slaves by people with light skin. Even after slavery ended, they were still treated badly. Many people said this would never change. But it did change. It started to change, Jake said. This man, his name was Martin Luther King, had a dream that people of all colors could live together in peace. Many people told him he was foolish. Some people tried to kill him for saying these things. Eventually, someone did kill him. Jake touched the screen again. The image changed to show a man with dark skin standing behind a podium. Behind him was a sign that read, President of the United States. This is Barack Obama, Jake said. In 2008, he became the leader of our entire country. 45 years after Martin Luther King was killed for dreaming of equality, we elected a man with dark skin to be our president. Kethvar stared at the image. The dream came true. Part of it came true, Jake corrected. We still have problems. People still treat each other badly sometimes, but we keep trying to be better. That's what humans do. We fail, we learn, we try again. Jake showed more images. People working together to clean up after earthquakes. Volunteers feeding hungry children in poor countries. Scientists from different nations working together to cure diseases. This is our real strength, Ambassador, Jake said. Not our weapons or our technology. It's our refusal to give up hope, even when everything looks hopeless. The screen showed a picture of Earth taken from space. The blue and white planet looked small and fragile against the black of space. We almost destroyed this planet several times, Jake continued. We polluted the air and water. We cut down forests and killed animals. We built enough nuclear weapons to destroy all life on Earth 10 times over. But you did not destroy it, Kethvar said. No, we didn't. Because every time we made a mistake, some of us worked to fix it. Every time we created a problem, someone tried to find a solution. We learned to clean the air and water. We planted new forests. We signed treaties to limit nuclear weapons. Jake leaned back in his chair. Your species conquers through fear, Ambassador. You show people destruction and death, and they surrender because they can't imagine anything worse. Yes, Kethvar said. Fear is the most powerful force in the universe. No, Jake said quietly. Hope is more powerful than fear. We've proven that over and over. Every time we faced something that should have destroyed us, some of us found a way to survive and rebuild. Every time someone said something was impossible, someone else figured out how to do it. Jake stood up and walked to the small window in the meeting room. Outside, space stretched endlessly in all directions, filled with stars and possibilities. You want to know why we don't fear you? Jake asked, turning back to face the ambassador. Because we've already faced our worst fears and survived them. We've seen what happens when hope dies, and we've learned how to bring it back to life. Kethvar stood up slowly. His massive form towered over Jake, but for the first time in the conversation, he didn't seem threatening. He seemed uncertain, almost vulnerable. I have conquered 47 worlds, Kethvar said slowly. I have made entire species kneel before me. But I have never met anyone like you before. Jake smiled. You've never met anyone who had already conquered themselves. Kethavar returned to his ship in complete silence. His guards followed behind him, confused by their leader's strange behavior. The ambassador walked through the corridors of the massive Zephyrian vessel like someone in a dream. Other crew members stepped aside as he passed, but he barely noticed them. When he reached his private quarters, Kethavar dismissed his guards and locked the door. For the first time in decades, he wanted to be alone. He sat in his command chair and stared out at the stars through the large window. Everything he had believed about the universe had just been turned upside down. For his entire life, he had known one simple truth: fear was the ultimate weapon. Every species in the galaxy understood this. The strong ruled through terror, and the weak submitted to survive. It was the natural order of things, but these humans were different. They had shown him something impossible, a species that had survived not by conquering others, but by conquering themselves. A people who had faced their own darkness and somehow found light in it. Kethavar activated his communication system. The face of High Commander Vexthra appeared on the screen. Her black scales were marked with the scars of 100 battles, and her eyes held the cold intelligence of a master strategist. "Report, Ambassador," Vexthra commanded. "Have the humans submitted to our terms?" Kethavar hesitated. In 40 years of service, he had never failed to break a species during first contact. He had never even needed more than one meeting. But now he found himself struggling to find words. "The humans are unusual," he said finally. "Unusual how?" Vexthra's voice grew sharp. "Did they threaten you? Do they have weapons we should know about?" "No weapons," Kethavar replied. "At least, none that they showed me. But High Commander, I do not think our usual methods will work on this species." Vexthra leaned forward on her screen. "Explain." Kethavar took a deep breath. "They do not fear us. When I used our intimidation protocols, their captain remained completely calm. When I showed him images of worlds we had destroyed, he seemed interested, but not frightened." "Then you did not try hard enough," Vexthra said coldly. "Return to their ship. Increase the fear toxins. Show them what happens to species who defy us." "High Commander," Kethavar said carefully, "I believe that would be a mistake." The silence that followed was dangerous. No one questioned Vexthra's commands. No one suggested that Zephyrian methods might fail. "You believe it would be a mistake to follow standard procedure?" Vexthra asked, her voice deadly quiet. "These humans have spent their entire history fighting against impossible odds," Kethavar explained. "They have faced plagues that killed millions, wars that destroyed continents, and disasters that should have ended their civilization. Each time they survived and became stronger. So they are warriors," Vexthra said. "We have faced warriors before." "No, High Commander, they are something else entirely. They do not fight just external enemies. They fight themselves, constantly. Their greatest battles have been against their own worst instincts, and they have been winning those battles for thousands of years." Kethavar stood up and began pacing his quarters. "When I showed Captain Morrison our conquests, he was not impressed. When I demonstrated our power, he offered me coffee. This is not a species that can be intimidated." "Every species can be broken," Vexthra insisted. "We simply need to find the right pressure point." "What if we are wrong?" Kethavar asked quietly. "What if there is a species that cannot be broken? What if trying to break them makes them stronger?" The question hung in the air between them. Vexthra stared at her ambassador through the screen, and Kethavar could see her calculating, thinking, considering possibilities she had never imagined before. "What are you suggesting, Ambassador?" she asked finally. Kethavar took the biggest risk of his career. "I suggest we try something that has never been done in Zephyrian history. I suggest we offer them an alliance." "An alliance?" Vexthra's voice rose in shock. "We do not make alliances. We make conquests. We rule or we destroy." "High Commander, consider this," Kethavar said urgently. "We have built our empire by conquering species weaker than ourselves. But what happens when we meet something stronger? What happens when we encounter enemies that cannot be intimidated?" "We have not met such enemies," Vexthra replied. "Not yet. Kethavar agreed. But the galaxy is vast. There are things out there in the dark spaces between stars that we have only heard rumors about. Ancient powers that predate our civilization. If those legends are true, we may need allies who cannot be broken by fear. Vexthra was quiet for a long moment. Kethavar could see her considering his words, weighing possibilities and risks. You believe these humans could stand against such threats? She asked. I believe they are the only species I have ever met who might welcome such a challenge, Kethavar replied. They do not run from impossible fights, they run toward them. Meanwhile, back on the Meridian, Jake Morrison stood on the bridge looking out at the Zephyrian ship. His crew had recovered from their fear and were back at their stations, but they kept glancing at him with new respect. Captain, said Dr. Lisa Parker, what do you think will happen now? Jake smiled. I think we just changed the rules of galactic politics, Lisa. For the first time in their history, the Zephyrians met a species they couldn't scare into submission. Do you think they'll attack us? Asked Commander Ben Walsh. No, Jake said, confidently. I think they're going to do something much more interesting. I think they're going to ask themselves a question they've never had to ask before. What question is that? Amy Foster asked. Jake turned to face his crew. What do you do when you meet a species that refuses to be afraid? What do you do when your primary weapon doesn't work? On the Zephyrian ship, Kethavar was still talking to High Commander Vexthra. I request permission to extend an offer of alliance to the humans, he said formally. Vexthra stared at him for nearly a minute. Then slowly she nodded. Permission granted, Ambassador. But if this fails, if they use our offer against us, then we will face that challenge as we always have, Kethavar replied. But High Commander, I do not think they will betray us. These humans seem to prefer making friends to making enemies. As both ships prepared to begin the most unusual negotiation in galactic history, neither side fully understood what they were starting. But both knew that everything had changed. The universe had just become a more interesting and dangerous place.